Schindler's on the corner of 7th and Hemingway. It was originally built as a residential hotel. Used that way until they cut the corner off, put a billboard up. I know that because I used to crawl up over the roof through a trap door down inside when I lived next door. One night we painted our faces as cat burglars and crawled down and explored the insides. The third floor was vacant. It's beautiful oak woodwork, sliding panel doors, and a balcony underneath the skylight. And that balcony opened the floor up so that the light would come down from the third floor into the second floor. The second floor had the same beautiful woodwork, but it wasn't vacant. There were rows of Playboy magazines laid out month after month, year after year, served as the archives for the store below. Schindler's on the corner of 7th and Hemingway was a newsstand, magazine stand, bookstore, kind of place where you could buy just about any kind of magazine. One of the magazines that you had been able to buy there was the James White Review. Jason Gaber had poems published in the James White Review. I met Jason in July of 1983 when I moved to Washington, D.C. I got there and picked up a program from Gay Pride Week, which had just ended, and had a list of artists who performed during that week. Jason was one of them, and I very boldly called him up on the phone, introduced myself, said I was interested in meeting other gay artists in town. He very warm-heartedly and generously invited me to come over that very minute, have tea, and sit down and talk. Late last winter, I was flying to Jason's memorial service in Washington. I had to make a connection at JFK. Unfortunately, there was a storm, and I ended up circling at JFK for an hour and a half to 2 hours, and by the time I took a cab from DC National to where Jason's memorial service was being held, the janitor was just turning off the light, closing the door. Next door to Schindler's was the building we called the Hollywood School of Beauty. That was one of the businesses that had been in that building. Originally it was a greengrocer's and a Nickelodeon. Held a Chinese restaurant at one point that closed because of the fire in the back in the kitchen. It had also been a residential hotel. It was for a couple years my home and my dance studios. Friends of mine lived on the second floor underneath and had a loft space there. We lived there until the inspections department made it too difficult to stay in the building because it had then become known as blocky and was slated for future development. They didn't want to have artists living in the building. It might have been problematic. When it came time to have it locked down. So we decided rather than fight it at that time, we would have a celebration and leave. We hired 3 bands. I got a ticket that night for making too much noise on Saturday night at 7th and Hemingway. One of my favorite memories of that block is the view out the back. The fire escape in the back of that building had a wonderful view of rooftops, fronts and backs and sides of buildings. I still have that painting. It hangs in my studio now. Next to it hangs a painting that was done by Tom Dunn. Jason died on Sunday night. Tom died on Tuesday morning. When I heard about Tom's death, I was still too much in shock from the news of Jason's death to really soak it in. And it wasn't until I learned that Tom had left me a painting in his will that I was moved enough to be able to cry. Then I could cry for Tom as well. The building next door to that was the smallest building on the block. It was only 2 stories. When I first moved on Block E, there was a Middle Eastern restaurant there, and that closed shortly after I moved in, which was actually fortunate for me because when they sold the restaurant goods, I was able to buy a beautiful stainless steel countertop for $20 to move up into my kitchen. And as that restaurant moved out, Fantasy House moved in. They sold lace and latex novelties, and in the back they had a section of 25-cent movies, which is where we filmed a portion of Schindler's to Schindler's and had performers sneaking in and out of the 25-cent movie booths. Jackie Doan liked Schindler's to Schindler's. When I moved to Washington, I did a piece with him that was actually very similar, but it was a stage piece. It was called DuPont Pie, and in it I played a business executive by day and wore this suit, and I played a drag queen by night, and I had 2 minutes to change. Jack was a real genius, had a feeling for that underbelly of the city, for the sort of thing that too often gets sanitized around here. Jack's gone now too. And next door to that was Moby's. Moby's, the bar that everybody who was never inside it was afraid of. The kind of bar that I went inside, negotiated and signed my lease with my landlord. The kind of bar that has a history of getting shut down in Minneapolis because a lot of black people go there. Before it was Moby's, it was the Flame. Before it was the Flame, it was the President. And I'm sure it was something else before that. And above Moby's was the Rand Hotel. When I asked at the airport if the limousine stopped at all the hotels downtown, they told me yes. And when we got into the city and I said I wanted to go to the Rand Hotel, they told me they didn't stop there. So I had to get out of the North Star. Hector would have been comfortable having a drink at Moby's. I performed with Hector at the Joyce Theater in New York City. He was a wonderful, fiery, talented, spirited dancer, and also a gifted choreographer. His career was just starting to take off. He was performing a lot, having more opportunities to perform than he could handle. He was offered commissions by the Dance Theater Parliament, Al Neely. Unfortunately, as he was getting more and more work opportunities, he started getting sick. Progressed pretty quickly. Next door to Moby's was the building that housed McDonald's. Oh, excuse me. There was one building I almost forgot. Next door to that was the Great Northern Market. It's no longer the Great Northern Market because that was bought out by the Alexander Brothers, who always seem to know what things are about to be bought out. You could buy strawberries at the Great Northern Market. The last thing Tony wanted to taste before he died was a strawberry. He wanted that final sensation of somebody knew when he was going to die, to be the taste of the strawberry. And then was the building that housed McDonald's, Rifle Sport as an art gallery, previously Rifle Sport as a video and pinball arcade. And it housed the bowling alley, and it housed McDonald's, and it housed Head Shop, and it housed Schindler's on 6th. Unfortunately, it seems like all of these are lost too soon.